Bionicle Adventures 4 Legends of Metru. Written by Greg Farshty. Narrated by Numbskill. Chapter 3. The Coliseum towered over the city. It stood at the junction of all 6 Metru, so tall it looked as if it must touch the sky. The Coliseum was large enough to accommodate every Matoran in Metru, and served as both an athletic arena and the power station for the entire city. Turaga Dume's chambers were also to be found in this imposing building. One side of the arena was dominated by the massive statue of Toa Khan, the other by Dume's box. The Toa Metru entered the arena in the middle of a Kanoka disc tournament. All around them, Matoran surfed on discs over the undulating floor, trying to launch their Kanoka into hoops mounted high on the walls. When the players saw the visitors, they immediately ceased their game and moved aside. The floor of the arena settled back into its natural bowl shape. Great discs held high, the Toa Metru moved into the middle of the stadium. Quietly at first, the crowd began to chant, "Toa, Toa, Toa." Then the word burst from them in a cheer that rocked the Coliseum.
"Hello, Metru!"
Metru shouted, waving. Then he turned to the other Toa, saying,
"I always wanted to loud shout that."
From high in his box, Turaga Dume watched the arrival of the Toa with surprise. He was flanked by 2 Vaki Rurzak from Metru, and his huge, powerful hawk, Nivok, perched behind him. Dume leaned forward and said in disbelief, "Vakama?" Regaining control of himself with some effort, he continued, "Matoran in the morning, Toa by afternoon. No wonder you have not yet completed the Mask of Time."
"Forgive the delay, Turaga, but—"
Vakama began.
"One moment we're Matoran, the next we're power-jolted!"
shouted Metru, shaking his body to simulate the shock.
"And Toa-masked!"
Nokama held her great disc up, followed by the others, and said to Dume,
"We present you the great Kanoka discs as proof of our Toa stature."
"Toa must prove themselves with deeds, not simple gifts," Dume replied. Then, addressing the crowd, he said, "Matoran of Metru, the Great Spirit has provided 6 new Toa, who will undoubtedly demonstrate their worthiness on this field of honor." The crowd cheered, but the Toa Metru just stood there, stunned. All that work to retrieve the great discs, and Turaga Dume rejected them? One by one they handed the discs to Vakama, disappointment and scorn on their faces. This had been his idea, and it had not worked. "Catch this, fire spitter!" Anawa snapped. In the Coliseum's control box, Matoran busily worked a series of levers and switches. The Toa Metru could hear machinery grinding and clanking beneath their feet. Then Dume's face appeared on the giant screen overlooking the field. "Cross the sea of Protodermis," he boomed, "and be honored as Toa." The field began to move, shift, undulate beneath the Toa Metru. They struggled to keep their balance as wave after wave passed through the ground. Then a series of large silver columns topped with razor-sharp points erupted randomly out of the field, threatening to skewer the Toa. Metru narrowly avoided the first thrust, saying, "Lucky I'm so quick-fast." But that left Nuju in harm's way. The Toa Metru Vice leaped back, crashing into Wenua and sending them both to the ground.
"How will we survive?"
asked Nuju.
"We use the mass powers the Great Spirit gave us,"
answered Wenua.
"And just how do we do that?"
There was no time for a reply as more columns shot out of the ground. Back on his feet, Nuju pivoted out of the way of a pair of them, not realizing where he was swinging his crystal spike. His Toa tool swept the legs out from under Vakama, sending the Toa of Fire to the ground. The crowd began to laugh. Vakama shook off the impact and looked up to see a tidal wave of solid protodermis heading right for the Toa. He jumped to his feet as Nokama pointed to an archway on the far side of the field.
Follow me!
She shouted, leading the charge towards safety. The huge swell rose behind them, but the Toa were able to maintain their balance and slide down the side of the wave. But now more swells rose up in front of them, each larger than the last. One lifted Whenua high into the air and then dropped him on the field in a heap. More swells pounded the Toa from every side. Even as Onawa barely dodged a 25-foot tidal wave of protodermis, another hurled Nuju, Vakama, and Nokama in separate directions. Then, the largest wave of all rose before them, moving forward at alarming speed and breaking up into large blocks of metal.
Time to quick run!
Matau yelled.
Advance!
Nuju yelled.
No, retreat!
Said Whenua. Charging backward and colliding with the Toa of ice, they both looked up in time to see the blocks of protodermis raining down. Only swift reflexes saved them from being crushed.
Enough!
Proclaimed Dume. The Matorn in the control box dutifully shut down the field. The Toa Metru were scattered all over the field, exhausted. The crowd was silent. Dume peered down at the 6 figures and smiled.
"Let us praise these jesters," he said. "Perhaps they thought to entertain us during this difficult time."
"No!" shouted Vakama.
We are Toa!
Or are they imposters, responsible for Tawali Khan's demise?
Continued Dume.
Vakama here was the last to see him.
"Yes, but no! Not true!" Vakama stammered. Duma's face leered down from the giant screen.
Seize them!
Vakama's eyes widened as he saw Kreka and Nadiki step up beside Turaga Dume. Could it be?
No! It was them!
He yelled, pointing at the 2 Dark Hunters.
They did it!
Squads of Rorschach closed in on the Toa, their staves at the ready. The Matorn in the control box flipped more switches, converting the center of the field into a vast metallic whirlpool. Closest to the center of the vortex, Whenua, Nuju, and Onawa struggled to resist the pull. Nuju tried to dig his crystal spike into the ground, but the force of the whirlpool tore it from his hands, and it plunged into the darkness. Seconds later, Nuju joined it, flying headlong toward the vortex. On the way, he smashed into Whenua, sending the Toa of Earth plummeting into the whirlpool as well. Matau and Nokama plunged their tools into the protodermis to try and fight the pull. Vakama came flying toward them, but Nokama seized him at the last moment with her free hand. Onawa was not so fortunate. With a scream of help, he vanished into the whirlpool. Nokama looked around. The Rorschach were closing in and the 3 remaining Toa were helpless. Then her eyes fixed on the statue of Tawali Khan.
Vakama!
She shouted, pointing toward the sculpture.
The statue! Bring it down!
The Toa of Fire nodded and went to load a disc into his disc launcher. He was half done when he realized he had one of the great discs in his hand. Thinking better of it, he substituted discs from his pack. Taking as careful aim as he could under the circumstances, Vakama launched a series of discs at the base of the statue. Half of the discs contained the weakness power, half the reconstituted random power. The combination was explosive, sending the sculpture toppling to the ground. Rorschach scattered in its wake, some of them drawn into the vortex, others trapped beneath the weight of the statue.
Go, now!
Said Nokama. The 3 Toa scrambled over the statue, past the stunned Rorschach, and out of the Coliseum. As they ran, Matau stole a glance at Vakama's disc launcher.
Impressive Toa tool, he said. Trade?
But Vakama was not listening. His attention and his anger were fixed on the Turaga of his city. Dume turned to Nadiki and Kreka, barely controlled anger in his voice.
The new Toa must not interfere with the plan.
Nadiki shrugged.
They are mere Matoran in Toa armor, as is our duty. We shall not fail.
Kreka pondered that for a long moment before nodding his agreement. Outside the Coliseum, the three Toa Metru paused to catch their breath. Vakama's mind was still spinning from the revelation that Dume, Nadiki, and Kreka were allies.
The Dark Hunters took Toa Khan. For Turaga Dume, he's responsible, he said.
Nokama nodded.
And now he'll send them after us.
All because the fire spitter panic failed, grumbled Matau.
He remembered all too well what Vakama had said about standing by while Toa Khan was kidnapped. Vakama made no reply. There was nothing he could say.
We have to get out of here,
said Nokama. She looked down to see a transport chute far below. Jumping into one was risky. If the speed and timing of the leap were not just right, she would bounce off the outer layer rather than passing through into the magnetized protodermis flow. Taking a deep breath, she jumped off the ledge. An experienced diver, she kept her body as straight as could be, and her eyes focused on her destination. She struck the chute perfectly, passing through the outer layer and immediately swimming smoothly in the chute. High above, Vakama watched her dive with awe, and not a little fear. Tamatoran didn't go leaping around like Metru cable climbers, or swimming in the sea like rookie fish. Vakama had never gotten into a chute except for a chute station. Besides being dangerous, it was a sure way to attract the attention of Vaki. Behind him, Matau grew impatient. He gave Vakama a shove and sent the toe of fire flying. Fortunately, he hit the chute at just the right moment and made it into the protodermis flow safely. It took him a moment to adjust to the new environment. He grabbed a passing piece of cargo and let it pull him along behind Nokama. Matau turned at a noise behind him. Kreka and Nadiki had emerged from the Coliseum. At the sight of the Toa, they shape-shifted into a more aerodynamic mode and shot forward. Panicked, Matau leaped. Under ordinary circumstances, the Metru native was one of the best at chute jumping, but he had never tried to do it with two Dark Hunters right behind him before. His arms and legs were going every which way as he fell. He landed with a hard splat on the top of the chute, then slowly oozed into the protodermis. Part of him was happy for the temporary safety, while part hoped no one he knew had seen him. Turaga Dume walked silently through his private chamber. Despite the numerous lightstone lanterns, the vast room still felt shadowy and cold. Ignoring the great throne that rested on the polished floor, Dume triggered a secret door in the rear wall and passed through. Beyond the door was a room no eyes other than his own had ever seen. Sunlight poured into the room from either side to strike a pair of huge sundials. The instruments were made of great circular plates inscribed with a language that was ancient when Metru was new, and posts of a dark stone that cast eerie shadows. The plates rotated with a rhythmic clicking, bringing the shadows from the sundial posts closer and closer with each second. Turaga Dume walked toward the darkest recesses of the room. A pair of sinister red eyes loomed in the shadows before him. A voice like thunder growled from the pit.
The mask of time will not be completed.
No, said Turaga Dume. But when the great shadow falls, the Vaki will ensure every Matoran's fate. The eyes receded into the darkness. The room was as silent as the grave once more. End of Chapter 3.